Good morning. We're learning chapter 22 in Tractate Shabbos, page 144. We start from the top. Shelo lerotzen. We ended off yesterday discussing that about women's milk and comparing it to blood of her wound in regards to susceptibility to tumor, and similarly with milk of an animal. So it says Chalav Amulei Im Timi Chalavei Shel Rotzin. If the Torah designated as a cause of susceptibility to tumor the milk of a woman that did not emerge to one's satisfaction, Shedama Gifosotame, so far as the blood of a wound causes susceptibility to tumor, Yitam Chalav Abehim, will it likewise designate as a cause to susceptibility to tumor the milk of an animal. That did not emerge to one's satisfaction. Shedama Gefosa Toher, when the blood of its wound does not cause susceptibility to tumor. Certainly not, for the only reason that a woman's milk that emerged unintentionally is legally considered a beverage is because it is like the blood of her wound, which has beverage status, even though she is not generally desirous of its coming forth. The blood of an animal's wound, by contrast, is not considered a beverage altogether. Its milk will therefore not be considered a beverage unless its owner is content with its having come forth, with it coming out. Amar lo, and Rabbi Akiva said to them, Machmir ani b'chol u'mibedom. With regard to causing susceptibility to tumor, I consider the law of milk to be more stringent than the law of blood. For if one milks an animal for therapeutic reasons, the milk will cause susceptibility to tumor. If one bleeds an animal for therapeutic reasons, one who milks for therapeutic reasons, the milk causes susceptibility to tumor. But if one bleeds an animal for therapeutic reasons, the blood will not cause susceptibility to tumor. We see that the law of milk is more stringent than that of blood. Likewise, with regard to milk that came out unintentionally, I treat the milk of an animal more stringently than I do to its blood, and therefore rule that although an animal's blood does not cause susceptibility to tumor, its milk will, even if its emergence was not to its owner's satisfaction, meaning the owner didn't want it to come out. Amulai, the sages said to Rabbi Akiva, Sale zeisim v'anovim yoichichu. The law of liquid that flowed from baskets of olives or grapes will demonstrate the liquids that come forth unintentionally cannot be compared to liquids that come forth to the satisfaction of their owner. Shamash kinaitzimem, for this is the law regarding liquids that oozed from these baskets. Lerotz and tmein, if they're coming forth is to the owner's satisfaction, they will cause susceptibility to tumah. They will cause susceptibility to tumah, as they are then deemed as beverage. But if their coming forth is not to his satisfaction, they will not cause susceptibility to tumah, since they are then not legally considered beverages. We see that the legal character of liquids is dependent upon whether they emerge to the owner's satisfaction. If they did not, they are not legally deemed beverages. Accordingly, animal milk extracted unintentionally, like the case we just mentioned, that he does it for healing, for therapeutic reasons, is not regarded as a beverage and thus cannot generate susceptibility to tumah. In order to generate susceptibility to tumah, it needs to be regarded as a beverage. The Gemara makes an assumption regarding this Mishnah. My love, lerotze de nichale. Now, does the Mishnah mean, the Mishnah's term to the owner's satisfaction mean that the owner of the fruit is satisfied that the liquids are oozing from the fruit? Shelo lerotzen b'susama, and the term not to his satisfaction mean that he makes no explicit statement either way. Based on the assumption, the Gemara concludes its question regarding Rabbi Yehuda's opinion concerning the juice of mulberries and pomegranates stored for no stated purpose. Uma zeisim v'anovim comes to olives and grapes, the v'nei schitaninu, which are generally designated for squeezing, shelo lerotzen v'lo yichlum, the liquid that oozed from them, not to the owner's satisfaction, without the owner stating his intent, is regarded as no beverage at all, since we assume that the owner is dissatisfied with its emergence. Tutim v'rimainim, then it comes to mulberries or pomegranates, the lav b'nei schitaninu, which are not generally designated for squeezing, lo kol sheken. Is it not certainly true that the liquids that oozed from them without the owner stating his intent will not be considered a legal beverage? For in that case, we may certainly assume that the owner is not satisfied with the liquid. But the aforesaid Baita stated in the name of Rabbi Yehuda that if one stores mulberries and pomegranates without stating what they are to be used for, the juice that oozes from them is prohibited for consumption, since we assume that the owner will be satisfied with the emergence of liquid from these fruits, and may consequently be led to squeeze them. But this assumption is in no contradiction to this Mishnah's ruling. The Gemara resolves the contradiction. Lo lerotz b'stama, no. What the Mishnah's term to the owner's satisfaction means is that the owner of the fruit makes no statement regarding his intent. Shelo lerotzen de gala adaite, while the term not to his satisfaction means that he explicitly revealed his intent, the Amma, inasmuch as he clearly stated, Lo nichali, I do not find it satisfactory that this liquid oozes out. The Mishnah is thus ruling that if the owner gives no indication of his wishes for the fruit, we in fact do assume his satisfaction. The juice the fruit exudes will accordingly be considered a beverage. The Mishnah is thus in perfect accord with the Baisa cited above. Good morning. The Gemara resolves the contradiction in another manner. If you wish, you may say that liquid that oozes from olives or grapes that are placed in baskets is different. Since it stands to sip through the holes in the basket, and he lost the owners by placing the fruits in basket, are clearly abandoning the juice from the start. Therefore, even without an explicit statement of this satisfaction with the oozing of the juice, we may assume that the owners are not particularly satisfied with it. The Bais, however, deals with a case of food placed in sealed containers, in which there is no reason to presume this satisfaction. In that case, we indeed assume that there being no indication to the contrary, the owner is in fact satisfied with the emergence of the juice. Now he turns to the comment made above in the name of Shmuel, namely that Rabbi Yehuda agrees with the sages in the case of liquid that oozes from olives or grapes, while the sages agree with Rabbi Yehuda in the case of liquid that oozes from other sorts of fruit. We have indeed found a source that says that Rabbi Yehuda agrees with the rabbis regarding liquid that oozed from olives and grapes. But from where do we know that the rabbis agree with Rabbi Yehuda regarding liquid that oozed from other sorts of fruits? The Gemara answers that Tanya, it has been taught in a Braisa Seichatin. We may squeeze v'fagin v'frishin v'izodin, plums, quinces, or sorb, apples, on the Shabbos in order to drink their juice. Since these fruits are not generally designated for squeezing. But we may not squeeze pomegranates on the Shabbos in order to drink their juice, since pomegranates are generally designated for squeezing. Before we said that usually pomegranates are not. You said since pomegranates are generally designated for squeezing. The Brisa supports the notion that pomegranates are used for squeezing. And the members of the household of Menashe bar Menachem would squeeze pomegranates during the weekdays. We see that there are those who customarily squeeze these fruits. One is therefore prohibited to do so on the Shabbos. We see from this Baisa that in the case of other sorts of fruit, one is permitted even to deliberately squeeze them for their juice. One is thus certainly permitted to use the juice that oozes from them of its own accord. And from where do you know that this ruling is the opinion of the rabbis, sages? Perhaps it is only the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. But let it be Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Even if it is, the Brisa will still constitute proof that the rabbis agree with Rabbi Yehuda in the case of other sorts of fruits. For what can you say that you have heard said of Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah? Only that liquids that oozed from the fruits of their own accord are permitted for consumption. Did you hear anything that says that you're allowed to initially squeeze fruits? What then must you say? Since these fruits are not generally designed or designated for squeezing, Rabbi Yehuda permits one even to initially squeeze them on Shabbos. You can even say that the ruling is that of the rabbis. Since these fruits are not generally designated for squeezing, one is permitted even to initially squeeze them on the Shabbos. One may learn from this reasoning that this ruling is the opinion of the rabbis as well as of Rabbi Yehuda Shmamina. Indeed, one may learn this from this reasoning. The Brisa thus constitute proof with regard to fruits other than olives, grapes, mulberries, and pomegranates. The rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda agree that one is permitted even to squeeze them on the Shabbos for their juice, and certainly to make use of juice that flows from them of its own accord. The aforecited Brisa stated Rabbi Menashe Amitay, household of Menashe bar Menachem would squeeze pomegranates. And the halacha follows the members of the household of Menashe bar Menachem. One is therefore prohibited to squeeze pomegranates on the Shabbos. Amar le Rava, Rav Nachman Menashe Menachem Tanu. Is then Menashe Menachem a disputant in this Baisa? His practice is merely cited in support of the Tana who prohibits squeezing pomegranates. Why do you say that the halacha follows Menashe? Rava continues, and if you will say that all you mean is that the halacha follows the Tana who prohibits squeezing pomegranates because his ruling is in accordance with the practice of the household of Menashe ben Menachem that establishes pomegranates as fruits designated for squeezing, because the Tana is in accordance with Menashe ben Menachem, the halacha follows him. But the practice of Menashe's household alone is not sufficient reason to establish pomegranates as being designated for squeezing. Menashe ben Menachem aviruba dalmo. For is Menashe Menachem the majority of the world that we should set the standard for the proper use of pomegranates according to his custom? How can you say that the prohibition against squeezing pomegranates is based on the practice of a single individual? And what says Ein? With regard to establishing the legal character of a fruit, the practice of even a single individual has significance. If one maintains thistles in a vineyard of Eliezer or Bilazar Imer, Kidesh, he has rendered the grapevines forbidden for benefit. No species renders a vineyard forbidden except one whose like is usually maintained by people in their fields. Since people do not normally cultivate thistles, they do not render a vineyard forbidden. What is Rabbi Elazar's reason for ruling that thistles will render a vineyard forbidden? For in Arabia, people maintain fields, thistles for their camels to eat. We see that if even the inhabitants of only a single place we see that even if the inhabitants of only a single place use a given item in particular manner, the practice will set the standard for what is universally regarded as proper use of them. Likewise, with regard to Menashe bar Menachem, although he is but a single individual, his practice will cause pomegranates to be universally regarded as being designated for squeezing. Midi Irya Darvayo Asr. Rabio is a place and boasts many inhabitants. The fact that so large a public maintains thistles in its field, indeed good reason to consider thistles a commonly cultivated plant. However, in the case of Menashe bar Menachem, since he is a mere individual, his opinion considering the squeezing of pomegranates is negated by that of all other men. Rava's challenge to Rav Nachman thus returns: how can we say that the prohibition to squeezing pomegranates is based on nothing other than the practice of individual Menashe bar Menachem? Due to Rava's challenge, the Gemara will now give an entirely different explanation of Nachman's understanding of why the Brisa cited the practice of Menashe bar Menachem. The basis for this understanding is Rav Nachman's adoption of a novel means of establishing a liquid's beverage status, which he deduces from a statement made by Rabbi Chisda. Beets that one squeezed and whose juice one placed into a mikveh. Placed into a mikveh, the juice will invalidate the mikveh by causing a change in the appearance of the water. But since beets are not generally designated for squeezing, the juice is not considered a beverage. A mikvah, however, can only be invalidated by a liquid that possesses beverage status. What then must you say? Since when one squeezes the beets for the juice, he gives the juice significance. It is regarded as a beverage, despite the fact that most people would not recognize it as such. Al-Khanami here too with regard to one who squeezes fruit for the juice, since by doing so he gives the juice significance as a beverage. It is regarded as a beverage, and thus will render him liable if he squeezes it on the Shabbos. We see that even if a given fruit is not used by the majority of the world for its liquid, one who does squeezes it for its juice on the Shabbos will nonetheless be liable for doing so, since his action by demonstrating his regard for the liquid that is extracted lends significance to it. One is accordingly prohibited from squeezing fruit for the purpose of drinking the liquid that will be extracted. Accordingly, when the Baisa permits one to squeeze plums, quinces, and sorb apples, it perforce does not permit one to do so for the purpose of obtaining the juice. For squeezing, for this reason, would render the juice a beverage, which is prohibited. Evidently, then, the Baisa is only sanctioning the squeezing of these fruits for the purpose of sweetening them, since in that case the squeezing does not demonstrate regard to the liquid, and therefore does not render it a beverage. Now, since the Baisa's ruling regarding the plums, quinces, and sorb apples concerns squeezing for the purpose of sweetening, it follows that its ruling regarding pomegranates also concerns squeezing for the purpose of sweetening. The Baisa is prohibiting one to squeeze pomegranates even in order to sweeten them. The source of this prohibition is a rabbinic decree. The rabbis feared that allowing one to squeeze pomegranates for the purpose of sweetening them might lead one to squeeze them for their juice. The basis for the suspicion was the fact that there are individuals, such as the members of the household of Menashe bar Menachem, who squeeze pomegranates for the juice on a regular basis. Rav Nachman states that the halacha follows Menashe. He means only to rule in accordance with this decree. Rav's challenge is thus resolved. Rav Papa objects to the above explanation of Rav Chisda's statement regarding beet juice in a mikveh. Rav Papa Omer, Mishum David Dover Shenoisim in mikveh lechatchila. The reason beet juice invalidates a mikveh is not because it is regarded as a beverage, but because it is a substance from which one may not initially make a mikveh. Any substance from which one may not initially make a mikveh will invalidate the mikveh by causing a change in the appearance of the water. It is not necessary for the substance to be a legal beverage. Having cited this dispute regarding what sort of substance will invalidate the mikveh through altering its color, the Gemara cites an identical dispute between two other Amiroim. Tanan Hosom, we have learned in a Mishnah there, if wine or vinegar or olive water fell into the mikveh and changed its appearance, possibly it is invalid. The Gemara assumes that only a liquid with a legal beverage status will invalidate a mikveh in this manner. And accordingly asks, Man Tana de Mechal Mashku, who is the Tana who holds that olive water is regarded as a beverage? Amar Rabbi Yaakov. It is Rabbi Yaakov, the Tanya. It was taught in a Brais. Rabbi Yaakov says, Mechal arel kemashke. Olive water is like a beverage and is therefore susceptible to tumah. What is the reason they said that olive water that comes out of the olives at the beginning of the pressing process is not susceptible to tumah? Because in the case of this sort of olive water, the owner does not desire its existence. It therefore cannot be considered a beverage. Olive water is not like a beverage and therefore will not be susceptible to tumah. And what is the reason they said that the olive water that flows from the netting of one olive dress of the olive press is susceptible to tumah? Because it is impossible for this sort of olive water to be without traces of actual oil, which as a full-fledged beverage will certainly be susceptible to tumah. The water itself, however, is not deemed a beverage. We see that with the exception of the water that emerges at the beginning of the pressing process, Rabbi Yaakov holds that all olive water is considered a beverage. It thus must be he who rules that olive water will invalidate a mikveh by changing its color. My benai, what practical difference is there between Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Shimon? Both seem to agree that the olive water that comes out at the beginning is not susceptible to tumah, while that which flows from the netting is ika benai da'osi bosar itzatzto. The difference between them is regarding the olive water that comes out after the pressure of the olives upon one another. This water is not actually oil, but is yet something whose existence is desirable to its owner. Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Shimon disagree as to whether it has beverage status. Rava disagrees with the above explanation of why olive water invalidates a mikvah. Because it is a substance from which one may not make a mikvah. It therefore invalidates the mikvah by causing a change in the appearance of the water. A liquid need not be a legal beverage in order to cause such invalidation. One cites a Rabbinic ruling regarding squeezing grapes on the Shabbos. Person may squeeze a cluster of grapes into a pot of food on the Shabbos. Again, the emphasis is into a pot of food on the Shabbos, but not into a bowl. We can learn from the words of our teacher. One may milk a goat into a pot, but not into a bowl. We see that Shmuel holds that a beverage extracted for use in food, such as one squeezing into a pot, is itself regarded as a food, not a beverage. One is therefore permitted to squeeze it out, since one is only prohibited to squeeze out liquids if they possess legal beverage status. Moshe Ram Bar Chama challenged Shmuel on the basis of the following Mishnah. A zav, a person that has a non-voluntary emission, milks a goat. The milk is tameh. So now, since this Mishnah does not differentiate between whether the zav milked the goat into a pot or into a bowl, it implies that the milks will be tameh in either case. But if you say that a beverage extracted for use in food is itself regarded as food, then when the milking is done into a pot, the milk is a food and accordingly cannot acquire tumah without first being made susceptible to it. But with what does it become susceptible? It was not brought into contact with any beverage. Since the Mishnah nonetheless rules a tameh, it evidently holds that a beverage extracted for use in food is not considered a food, but a beverage. The explanation is, as Rabbi Yochanan once said regarding the milk of a tameh woman, it is made susceptible to tumah through contact with a drop of milk that is smeared upon the opening of the nipple, which is considered a beverage. In the case of goat milk, But it is made susceptible to tumah through contact with a drop of milk with a drop of milk that is smeared upon the opening of the nipple. Shmuel's principle is thus stands. Ravina challenge him from the next segment of the Mishnah. In the case of one contaminated with corpse tumah who squeezed olives or grapes, if the olives or grapes squeezed are precisely equivalent in volume to an egg, then although they themselves are tummy, the liquid extracted from them will not be contaminated by them, for immediately upon being squeezed, the fruit is reduced to less than the volume of an egg, and food of less than an egg volume cannot generate tumah. We'll continue at willing tomorrow. Buchem Tiyah.